And welcome back to the Nutrimedical Report. And Ann Morrison, let's go through some of the news. If you go to your blog, which is TWILAND, TWILAND.INFO, which we have a link at the bottom of our panel on the right-hand side, affiliates, on Nutrimedical.com, you've done an amazing amount of work every week, and I want to thank you for all that hard work. There's a lot of really serious stories going on. You deal with biosecurity, earthquakes, volcanoes, and weather. You deal with things like the massive immigration of unaccompanied minors that are being dumped across the border. All kinds of issues. Let's go through all of these now.
Well, I kind of want to start with ZIKA, but if you want to start someplace else, that's okay too.
Let's start with ZIKA. ZIKA's a big deal, and it's getting bigger, and Obama wants $1.8 billion to deal with ZIKA, but I think that their whole approach to it is wrong-headed. Like the FDA approved now the use of these Franken mosquitoes to control the problem, and in fact they're part of the problem because it's an unstable gene that gets into the population, and it's my feeling that that unstable gene actually weaponized the Zika virus and made it more likely to be a pathogen.
Well, I think the problem is what people don't understand is that they haven't found Zika antibodies in people's blood. That's part of the problem. That's why they can't diagnose it. But it's because we don't have any defenses against it. It's something the body hasn't seen before.
Well, we do actually have a protocol that will kill all known pathogens. It turns out that you can stop biting insects with our allicin med. You can kill all pathogens through the biofilm with allicin med, nutriodine, and silver 100, which goes through the biofilm. We have natural defenses that disrupt all RNA and DNA virus capsules with my formula NutriDefense, which I designed based on things that will disrupt the viral capsid. So it's not that we don't have anything, it's just that the quote typical drugs like oseltamivir for the flu don't work on this, and they say they're going to work on a vaccine, but the problem is RNA viruses tend to mutate very quickly, so even if you quote had a vaccine that would help your body identify it, remember, vaccines don't activate your T killer cells. The ideal way to actually create immunity to any pathogen, and this is my theory, is you'd actually make a universal non-antigen demonstrating HLA antigens T cell. You'd actually activate against all known human pathogens and have populations that you give to people intravenously, and you'd periodically test to see if their pathogen, any pathogen population was adequate in their blood by special markers in a blood test. In other words, you don't focus on antibodies, what I call condiments to your immune cells to find the pathogen alone. You actually create activated T cells that will kill it. And that's something that's possible now with genetic engineering. We could actually make a genetically engineered and activated and educated T cell population that would kill all the known pathogens, including Zika virus, Ebola, and even existing viruses like hepatitis C and B. So our whole approach to disease needs to move into the 21st century and stop the idea that if we just create an antibody, we'll make the T cells be able to find the pathogen and then kill it, when in fact we need to actually increase the T cell population that has the capacity to find and kill it, and that can be done with our technology we have today.
Well, but that doesn't get it. I mean, that's very nice, and we would like to be able to do that. Mm-hmm. By the way, did you see the article I sent you about the novel compound that they've tested in monkeys, and it protects the monkeys from Ebola? Of course, that's still an animal study.
No, what's the novel compound consist of?
Well, they don't say. Called GS-5734.
Yeah, they always have these.
U.S. Amrid, and they say that it can not only kill the Ebola, but it can kill the MERS coronavirus. Now, those are two separate, entirely viruses. I mean, they aren't even closely related at all.
Yeah, as I say, the new genetic engineering technologies allow us, we know this for cancer, for example, it does some cancer research, and they can actually take your T lymphocytes out, train them using genetic engineering technology to actually attack your tumor and just give it back to you, and it kills the tumor like crazy. One of the technologies that was developed was called the dendritic vaccine, and it started many years ago in Germany using the RNA in your free blood that was of the cancer, and then it would then train the T killer cells and grow them in a laboratory to a larger population, then give it back to you by intravenous. That's available at several clinics in Mexico and Tijuana. It's available here for prostate cancer, but you can get it for other cancers. What I think is we need to work on these we call biotechnologies, and the biotech companies that develop this technology are going to make buco bucks, because it is going to be very, very effective against cancer and major infectious diseases, not only just preventing illness, but if someone has an existing Ebola or HIV or stealth infection that's triggering off cancer or other illnesses like Lyme disease, which triggers off MS and MS flare-ups. There's 5 different subclasses that we will be able to eliminate these using the genetically engineered T lymphocytes. So that's something we can do today. It's not something theoretical. It's something that can be done today. You just have to apply the money and the resources to do it.
Well, they aren't. That's the problem. In fact, they finally said, well, I guess we can test the saliva. Because what happens is Zika clears out of the blood within a week or 10 days or 2 weeks. But it's still in the body, and it comes out in the urine and the saliva.
Wait, the way to test is not to test for the presence of the virus or try to culture it out. It's to test for the DNA sequences to indicate that there's using PCR technology, because it's going to persist in urine fat longer than in the blood even. And the fact is PCR will pick it up anywhere, even in saliva. So the approach should be PCR testing and also testing for the Intrexon Oxitec OX513A gene, because it's my feeling that one of the big problems is it's a gene plague that's actually modifying the host. And when the host gets modified, it produces higher levels of free radicals, and that actually weaponizes any pathogen in it. And this is a real danger. It's not just Zika virus. It's the fact that these genes actually, and this is, Dr. Mae-Wan Ho mentioned this in 2001 and again in 2014, that the moth that was actually released in Georgia years ago, I think 2005, has already jumped into other insects and other organisms in Georgia. So the fact is we're starting to pollute the biosphere with what we call jumping genes, with what we call transposon riddle genes that actually can jump into different parts of double-stranded DNA in animals and plants and can modify hundreds of different genes in the way they operate. So the problem is the FDA, which is another criminal organization, has now approved these Franken mosquitoes as a solution, and it does reduce the mosquito population, but the surviving mosquitoes have these bad genes that can jump into other populations, plus 1 in 200 is not male, it's female, because they do these manually when they count them, and by their own statistics, 1 in 200 is a female carrying these special genes, the OX513A gene. And if the gene just jumps into a different part of the genome, it's not lethal, even in the presence of no tetracycline, which interferes with the lethal gene mechanism. So what I see happening is a wrong science, which they knew from published research, and other scientists raised concerns, and a lack of accountability. Yeah, a lack of accountability. So you heard a little bit of this dialogue, have you, Matt, about the Zika virus, and what do you think?
I think it's interesting we have so many diseases arising in these very overpopulated areas of the earth, places where there's a very, very bad sanitary conditions and very high population growth rates, such as Africa. I mean, virtually all these diseases have come from, for some reason or other, from Central Africa. Whether it's AIDS, Ebola, Zika, it's pretty remarkable that all these diseases came from that one small area. But this, again, poses another threat of mass immigration. If we allow unchecked mass immigration of so-called refugees, they can, of course, inevitably spread diseases, just like when we came and met the Native Americans, right? We brought diseases which we were immune to, but they weren't immune to. Similarly, Europeans could contract novel diseases because of this mass immigration into Europe, thanks to Angela Merkel's foolish policies. The other thing is, of course, in America. I discussed last hour the foolishness of the merit-based system of immigration as being...
Yeah, you made a really good point there, too.
I pointed out that actually we've had merit-based immigration since 1965 with Ted Kennedy's idiotic act, the Immigration and Nationality Act, which basically said we no longer have any cultural preferences for who comes to the USA. It's all on the basis of how well educated you are and how wealthy you are, which are terrible measures because...
Yeah, we're...
Do you have to...
Back, and I don't hear construction in the background. Anne's got lots of different stories here to run through. It's been a while since we heard from you. We've got all the election stuff going on, the Zika virus exploding. But it's not just Zika. We have pathogens all over the world over the last few years doubling. In fact, some of the experts in infectious disease, both in wild zoonotic infections as well as human-borne plagues are dramatically increasing. New versions of H5N1, the PH1N1 flu, which is a California strain that struck eastern Ukraine as well. The Russians basically tried to say it was a bioweapon the way it was so pathogenic. Here in California, it killed, by middle of January, 147 people. It persists for up to a month. It's really deadly. I mean, people don't understand it. It causes incredible inflammation. But we have an explosion of pathogens all over the world. We have increased levels of earthquakes and volcanoes occurring around the world, extreme weather, seasons all mixed up, hot and cold. Lots of things are in an uproar, and it also puts food supplies and populations in jeopardy, which Matthew talked about with massive either environmental or other reasons for mass migration from population centers of third world countries into first or second world. This is not good.
A lot of the immigrants are from Africa. not far from the places these diseases originate. And as Ann said during the break, the Egyptian mosquito can actually survive without water for up to a year. So
the eggs of the mosquito.
Or a couple of years.
The eggs can survive, yes.
The eggs, yeah.
Before they transform into a mosquito. Now think about, I mean, not only are we not, there's virtually no control right now with these immigrants coming in through Turkey. There's virtually no screening, let alone is there any health screening, any way of seeing whether there are mosquito eggs or viruses being carried by these people. I mean, so that's another threat besides just the threat of course, ISIS have said themselves that they're laughing at us, saying they're going to infiltrate the refugees with ISIS members. And I mean, the irony here is, you think about it, what is the definition of a refugee? Obviously somebody who's escaped from someone like ISIS to a foreign country. Now imagine you're sitting there in your Euro shop in the USA or Europe, and then suddenly ISIS moves in next door to you. Or imagine that you're somebody who's a refugee of the PRC, and then suddenly PRC spies are living right next to you because we let them into the country. It's really funny that they call this a refugee program that's supposed to protect people, because obviously their first targets are going to be traitors from their own country or religion, as we've seen in America already, with people like Rashad Khalifa being murdered by Islamists right on our soil.
Right. So, Professor, we haven't had you back for a few weeks because of all the construction with your recent moves. What are the major stories you're following? Because we've got everything from energy. Obama's energy policies, by the way, are insane in terms of his fighting carbon credits. There are no real policies. And he's supporting wind technology, which is useless, these turbines, and then trying to transmit power hundreds of miles. And then wants to start selling carbon credits. He wants to really push this. We see it with Europe, with Germany, with Angela Merkel. The Germans are going to kill themselves with their industrial policies. We have also things like we don't have biosecurity happening. I'm writing a paper on biosecurity, what you need to do in order to test everybody coming in. For example, right now we have at least 500,000 people from Central and South America that are carrying the Trypanosoma cruzi, and they can't make the blood supply properly safe. So if you get a blood donation, you might get Trypanosoma cruzi, which will cause all kinds of horrific things, including in 20 years a period of 100% likelihood of a cardiomyogenic heart failure that kills you. It can also destroy organs like your brain and kidneys, etc. So what people don't understand is we have an invasion of every kind of thing that will destroy our culture, our health, and our population.
The biggest thing about immigration is that if you have large populations, whether it's Mexican or from Syria or mixed or whatever, is that they're much easier and much less costly to take care of there. And most of the real refugees
in their own country
they don't want to come to the United States. I had a recommendation for Donald Trump. I said, don't build a wall. He wants to build a wall and have Mexico pay for it. Don't build a wall. Take the money, invest in local industries in Mexico, and I don't mean take American industries and move them there like Nestle's or whatever else is going on.
No.
Hershey's part. No, don't do that. Create Mexican infrastructure. They need infrastructure there, and use that money to create jobs there, and and then get rid of the European bankers. Take the wealthy in Mexico and distribute that money amongst the poor. You got 3% of the people who own 90% of the money. Mexico is a very rich country, but if you
Did you know there's more billionaires per capita in Mexico than any other country on earth, including China? Do you know there's more billionaires and millionaires in Mexico than any other country in history, including China, Germany, anywhere else in the world? People don't know that, do they?
I guess that's a pretty good testament against social inequality, though, isn't it? Because Mexico's not very well organized.
No, but
Right.
there again, if I used to live in Mexico, if you go up to Las Lomas or the hill area up in the southwest corner of the city, I used to teach the kids there of the wealthy people. I mean, you're talking about movie theaters in the house and, a room full of African trophies and, extreme wealth there. And then down the block, you have extreme poverty. But, create an infrastructure of jobs there, and 95% of the Mexicans will go there.
I mean, in my
the other
opinion,
thing
that
I would
may well be a testament to that they need their own Bernie Sanders or something in Mexico, as opposed to. But they also have a population problem in Mexico City, at least. I mean, they're just massively overpopulated, and I think that's mostly because the Catholic Church tells them to reproduce mindlessly, even if they can't afford to raise their children.
Well, no, it's just it's the Mexican culture, and it has to do with machismo and everything else, where men go out and even the mothers promote the men to go out because then that promotes their manhood, and then it's a crazy three-pronged, strange social culture and it really doesn't have much to do with the Catholic Church, even though that's dominant there, the religion. But
well, they could at least stop telling people that it's a good idea,
Well, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But, look at the death rate there. The problem in the United States is those people come here. In Mexico, you have a 50% mortality rate before the age of 3. In the United States, all those kids survive, and so they're having babies here like they had in Mexico. But the
Right.
whole point is that you have to have an incentive for them to go back to Mexico, which they would. And
Right.
then if they want to protest, have them protest in Mexico. They learned how to protest here. They can protest, march, and carry signs and put it in Mexico.
Yeah, I hear the thesis that Trump puts together, and there's one idea about a wall, but a wall's not going to stop a plane that flies over and lands on Mena, Arkansas to bring in illegal drugs. With the CIA blessing and the blessing of the Department of Justice was Fast and Furious. The fact is we have corrupt elements in the government that are bringing in drugs by heavy lift Hercules aircraft. A lot of these are, quote, pseudo-military aircraft, the aircraft with the military reserve, that bring over military supplies and come back loaded to the gunnels with drugs. So, to say that they're going to make the country drug-free by putting in a wall is a little specious. It's not really true. In fact, they don't even necessarily need a physical wall if they want to stop people just scurrying across. They could have a motion sensor wall with drones and rapid reaction force that could stop them. So, to me, the real issue...
People have come across in Boston to work at Kentucky Fried Chicken and McDonald's.
Exactly. Ken, you wanted a couple of clear minutes without any interruptions to kind of say this important statement about sheriffs and what's going on, because when it does come a time for there to be a revolution in America, there's specific elements that you're going to explain that'll explain why these things are important. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Here is a topic. We have elections coming up next November. Everybody's starting to think about presidential elections. But you can elect all of the good people in the presidential office that you want. But in reality, the guy that affects your life is your local sheriff. He's the guy that's going to prevent a Ruby Ridge or a Waco or an Oregon siege by the BLM, or an Oregon or Nevada siege by the BLM and taking people's land away or whatever for political motivation from, say, congressman or Secretary of State or whoever. So at any rate, your sheriff, here's what you want to look for. You want to, first of all, make sure that the guy has no history of working for the federal government. If they do, can them. Get them out of there. Don't let them run. Do everything you can to expose that guy and beat him. And the guy you want in office, this is what you look for the guy you want. He's an oath keeper. He has pledged to maintain his oath. So that's the term oath keeper. Remember that. Second of all, constitutional sheriff. In other words, he bases his authority and what he does on the Constitution. So those are the two keywords, oath keeper And there are 4 oaths. One when you're born, that's your citizenship in the United States. Number 2 is when you get married. In other words, these guys are dedicated to their wives and families. Number 3 is your oath to God and a higher entity. And then the 4th oath is when they become sheriff. And to maintain that oath. So they're oath keepers. They don't take an oath and then slide it out and do something else. And they're constitutional sheriffs. They see that their job is on top of any federal laws. So there's a good example. I want you to go to this homepage. It's very simple to remember, sheriffdanpage.com. There you will see a guy, he's running in Missouri, the state of Missouri, for a county office of sheriff. That's an oath keeper and a constitutional sheriff. Look at his page. It's Sheriff Dan, D-A-N, Page, just like Page, sheriffdanpage.com. There you will see a constitutional sheriff. And there are many around the country. There's another organization called the Constitutional Organization of Peace Officers and Sheriffs and Peace Officers. And so anyway, there's another organization where sheriffs are organizing. They are organizing around the country and supporting each other because these sheriffs are coming under attack. And by organizing, they support one another. And their job is to keep the federal nutcases out of their county. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox here. Let's talk about this a little bit. But coming up this fall, concentrate on your sheriff, an office that many people have ignored for a long time. Now this is coming to roost. In fact, the sheriff can throw bankers out of your country because they're a foreign invader. You know, and their oath is to protect the citizens against all threats, internal and foreign. Okay.
Well, I think the biggest problem with police is that if they kill the suspect, right, in general, it's a total forfeiting of their entire job. I mean, for instance, we saw Ray Tensing, right? He shot this Sam Dubose guy. Now, I mean, yes, Sam Dubose was arguably a scumbag. Like, he had 13 children out of wedlock. He was drunk driving. But he starts tapping on the gas. If anybody's seen this video, starts tapping on the gas, and the very first thing that the cop, Ray Tensing, does is blow his head off. He doesn't even shoot him in the arm or something. He blows his head off because he's so afraid the guy's going to run him over. That, in my opinion, is just a massive act of cowardice. And not only that, something which absolutely has to be punished, because if you don't arrest the suspect, not only does the suspect not get a fair trial, but of course he gets pity. A guy who was a scumbag is now regarded by Black Lives Matter as being a victim.
Well, yeah, but is that a local police issue now or a sheriff issue?
I think it's probably both. Obviously the sheriffs are responsible for their training.
Two different issues, and we need to actually get non-lethal technology so the police feel, number one, that they can actually defuse a situation without going to lethal technology.
Well, I mean, the sheriffs are members of the Fraternal Order of Police, which, I mean, it's probably good to have some kind of union going on, but the fact that they're defending these fools, these cowards who've murdered suspects instead of arresting them, is pretty pathetic, in my opinion. I mean, that just totally negates the entire purpose of the police.
You can't paint them all together, though. Right? You can have a small percentage of people that are bad.
Well, they were threatening Quentin Tarantino for saying that it was murder, and I mean, technically, when you unnecessarily kill somebody, it's murder. Yes, the charge would be manslaughter, so technically, legally, it should be manslaughter, and maybe he should go to jail for a year or two, and not for his entire life, like a few.
You're talking about the movie producer Quentin Tarantino?
We're getting off on a tangent here. We're trying to
exactly.
And there are specific cases here which we can argue back and forth. But the issue here is the sheriff taking control of his county and not letting the federal government in. This is what we're talking about.
Well, this is the problem.
I mean, the federal government is behind a lot of this police training that's made them more aggressive, more.
The issue, though, I think, Matt, is we're going back on track. Is if we have sheriffs that protect our rights, federal government cannot go in like the BLM and do what they did in Oregon. We can't have, for example, a state of martial law declared by somebody like Obama if ISIS attacks, because Obama has literally set it up to make sure an attack like that will happen. before perhaps the November elections. And that could be very preemptive, where it actually could stop the idea of elections happening. And that may be one of the strategies. They figure if Trump gets in and Hillary gets indicted, they may say, hey, we're just going to pull the whole election thing and keep Obama in power. Nothing would surprise me.
I mean, the big problem is that our whole culture, ever since the 1960s, has suffered from ever more of what I call an excess of the lunar, an excess of this changeable and unrooted, not solid, not loyal mentality, because we've kind of become ever more transnational and global. And the natural consequence is that there's not enough social bonds between people to control their behavior anymore. Especially, you look for instance at black communities where there's just horrendous amounts of violence because there's no solid culture uniting them anymore. Like recently, just I think 2 or 3 days ago, actually 2 days ago, there was a mass shooting at a cookout in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This family is just standing outside eating barbecue, and then suddenly these two thugs come along and blow them all away. It wasn't even clear what the motive was, why they would do that. Last year, a guy actually took a 9-year-old boy into an alley and blew his head off. I mean, this is the kind of stuff we're dealing with here, and I think it results not just from social inequality, racism, and so forth. Those are an element of it, but the main cause is the culture is totally collapsed in a lot of these communities, and so there's no social
I think
bonds.
that's a good point. Now, one of the things I want to do before we finish up, we have a lot of different news items that Ann brought forward. Do you want to hit some of the highlights, news items that are over in your web blog called TWILAND.INFO, Ann?
Yes, we're coming up to the summer season now. Normally, the Aedes aegypti mosquito would be the one that we would be worried about because it lives year-round in the southern states. That includes Florida and the Gulf Coast, and it's up in Arizona, and it's starting to get into Southern California. But as we get into the summer season, we have another carrier of the Zika virus, which also carries chikungunya and dengue, and that's called the Aedes albopictus. And it is going to go
in other words,
into Missouri.
Right, exactly. And they've even said that some of these viruses may transfer to mosquitoes like in Missouri or even in Canada. They could survive extreme climates, so the virus may survive and embed itself into populations that we don't expect now. That could be big problems. Back in a moment with more with Professor McCanney and Morrison, our scientists, and Matthew.
Are you tired of the coldest?
So, and that's pretty scary, isn't it? That it could start.
Snowstorm.
I'd like you to repeat what you just mentioned, the highlights on during the break about Zika virus, because I think it's a kind of a platform for what I call the current environmental changes that are increasing the risk of not only international travel, but mutagenesis of many pathogens, a weakened population with things like Fukushima Daiichi, smart meters, Wi-Fi networks, and cell phones, increasingly genetically modified food that's destroying the immune systems of people, and increasing the chances also of these pathogens getting embedded in animal and pet populations and traveling around the world with, how can I say it, mixing seasons, where normally pathogens that wouldn't be present here are present in North America now because of immigration, because of the spread of things like Zika virus. If there's 1,000 people now with a Zika virus in their blood, it's very possible they could transfer that into mosquito populations and other animals or humans, and who knows what will happen.
Well,
and I'm not being an alarmist here. I'm trying to say it's not just Zika. We could have Western equine encephalitis, chikungunya, which has already been identified in the last 3 years as far north as New York State. Things are getting strange, and they're going to get stranger and more dangerous for people because the number of pathogens and their ability to travel and mutate is increasing dramatically.
I just want to insert something here that the only way that is effective for any disease, whether it's transferred by mosquito or whatever, is isolation. Vaccines or whatever, literally you have to isolate the population that has it, and I'm sorry, that's the way it is. And we have this thing, well,
I'll add one corollary to.
Well, the big problem with all this is, I mean, as you'll hear on my radio show on rentsradio.com, and if you want, you can talk to me on my website, MatthewDeagle.com, under contact. The the general trend in our society since the 1960s has been toward ever less isolation, ever more change, ever more disruption of any kind of foundation. So, again, all our policies and our culture have gone in the exact opposite direction from what we need to prevent the spread of these sorts of viruses.
Right. Exactly. And one of the things we could do, too, for example, is isolation into your PCR negative. At no port of entry, airports, seaports, or across borders, are we actually doing PCR of urine, blood, and stool to see if the virus is present? Not just can you grow it, and we could have rapid PCR within 15 minutes. You can tell if someone's positive or negative in any of those bodily fluids. And as soon as they're positive, they need to go into isolation until we can prove that they're non-positive, so they can't transmit it sexually or otherwise.
I mean, the
we
point
don't
is
have
that,
those policies.
The point is that really all these things result from our collective thoughts. This is all from our culture and our thoughts going in an imbalanced direction of just way too much changeability, no bonds, no loyalty, an excess of the lunar, which is characteristic of what's been going on. Again, as I said, since about the 1960s and been getting worse. Even religious fanaticism and hatred are manifestations of the exact same thing that causes this mass immigration. So we need to balance our collective consciousness. We need to restore some kind of loyal culture. Remember, again, my website is mattthewdeagle.com. You can contact me under contact. But I've been following these trends now holistically, right? The same way you look at the energy channels in the body and acupuncture, and literally all these things, even ISIS, are manifestations of what is the excessive lunar symbolized by the number 17.
Yeah, that makes interesting overall kind of global analysis. And is there any other major stories you're following that we need to discuss before we close off today?
Absolutely. We need to talk about CRE. CRE, you know what that is. It was found in scopes that were being used to photograph very sick people, and they found. You're talking about
sigmoidoscope and sigmoidoscopes as well as colonoscopes. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, and it's resistant to all of the antibiotics that they can use. I mean, there's no antibiotics that they can use on them. Well, initially they had it. It was just in the hospitals, but then they got sloppy, and then it got out of the hospitals through the sewage. Now they're supposed to have burned the sewage or the anything that patient touched in the hospital, or send it to a place where it would be burned up, but they didn't. They sent it to they went down the drain, and they went into the water treatment plants. Well, LA has water treatment plants. They have 4 of them that get this CRE bacteria, and they don't have any way to treat it. They weren't expecting to get a deadly drug-resistant bacteria in their water treatment plants.
Well, there's actually two ways I would treat it. Number one, I found this out, almost 40 years ago, that there are dairies in Canada that actually have boxes that have radiation. Same thing as cobalt for chemotherapy. And you take the milk cartons, and instead of pasteurizing, you drop them into this box. The Israelis have actually done more research than anybody on this, of irradiating food to actually sterilize it. But you can do the same thing with waste. The other thing you do is what's called high concentration ozone. Ozone is amazing. And also ultraviolet light of the right frequency. So those 3 technologies could completely eliminate this. They don't properly what's called cold sterilize these scopes. That's the problem. And they're sloppy doctors. Before I went into medicine, we actually went around the hospital's intensive care unit, emergency department, people's magazines, and the kids' toys in the doctor's offices, and they're always filthy pigsties. And then when you get into doctor's equipment, they presume they're clean because they put it through a procedure. It doesn't mean it's clean. And these resistant organisms resist everything, including many of the toxic chemicals that otherwise would kill, I call the Wally bugs, like Disney, instead of the Arnold Schwarzenegger bugs. These are Arnold Schwarzenegger bugs. They're not killed by these procedures, and you'd have to use a combination of radiation, ozone, and high-energy ultraviolet light. And that
Well,
will kill all of these
they're
things.
not doing that. They're not doing it at
No.
all. And the way they found this out was that surfers started coming into the hospitals with CRE bacteria. And they said, well, how did you get this? Well, we were surfing, that's all I know. And they went out and tested the water, and the CRE bacteria are in the surf water off the Southern California coast.
Right, because what's happening is the effluent waste coming out of the plants, they consider it clean, and they dump it into the ocean, and it sits in the top and forms foam, and then, of course, the surfers are getting it, and they're getting infected. That's why I tell people, do not do a colonoscopy or sigmoidoscopy until you're certain that the doctors are using ozone at a minimum, or radiation or ultraviolet light combination to sterilize the scope. These scopes aren't properly being sterilized, so if the previous people that used the scope had CRE, you're going to get it. And if you get clindamycin-resistant enterococci, you're in big trouble. And a lot of these enterococci also, they're what's called deconjugators. They take toxins that your liver conjugated to remove, and they deconjugate them, so they crash in your brain and cause brain problems. They crash in your organs, causing cancer or autoimmune disease. And so it's not a minor thing. Dysbiosis is a major trigger for many illnesses.
Well, and it's only got a 50%. 50% of the people that get it die.
Right, they develop what's called a toxic megacolon. Just like if you get, Clostridium difficile, they call it difficile because it's difficult to culture, but if it grows in your body, it'll kill you.
That's right, and the hospitals are to blame because they let it get out of the ICU, and then they circulated it around the hospital, and now they're flushing it down in the toilet and getting into the water treatment plants, and now it's out in the ocean, and 4 million people go swimming every year in Southern California.
Yeah, here's the problem. It's the same thing as the passive Muslims. Passive doctors, nurses, technicians, etc., hospital administrators that just want things to go away, doctors that won't speak out or ask the right questions, they don't have a strong enough background in infectious disease, and people don't go and test. And if you don't test, you don't know. You can presume because your floors are shiny or your equipment smells clean because it smells chemically. It doesn't mean it's free of CRE. And the problem I see with a lot of medicine is we don't have people that actually are willing to speak out. This is the reason why if 1% of Muslims are extreme, the passivity of the rest of them causes it to become a big problem. The same way as the passivity of doctors who won't integrate functional medicine, stop using toxic drugs, stop doing unnecessary procedures, not increasing technologies to make sure that we have safe entry into our borders in the United States or Canada or any Western nation. It's all because of passivity and the inability to ask tough questions to put people in charge on pins and needles saying, well, what do we do next? Well, we have to figure that out. But without data, we don't know what the issues are. And that's the problem, is they don't like people like me that ask questions. I call it ask them questions. Because if we did, we'd have PCR data for everybody coming into this country, the same way as all these scopes would independently be analyzed for CRE, and a lot of them would show positive. And if you give someone CRE, it can kill them. So,
well, and
yeah,
it's
a big deal.
Kill a lot of us too because they aren't even testing for it.
Well, it's again sloppiness. Sloppiness will kill you.
Sloppiness will kill you.
Yeah, that's a good report. And thank you, Professor McCanny. Thank you, Matthew. Back again Monday morning.